Okay, let's dive in. Think about it. You are swimming in information networks every single day.
Totally. Our phones, the internet, social media.
Exactly. They connect us in ways uh, previous generations couldn't even have imagined.
Right.
But how much do we really get about the deep history of these networks and, the immense power they actually wield?
And the big question,
Yeah.
is more information really leading us to more truth, or is it just more confusion?
That's the core, isn't it? There's this really common optimistic view.
You could call it the naive view of information, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds right. The idea that more data, more access, more connection, it just automatically leads to progress, better health, democracy, all that good stuff.
Like Google's mission, right? To organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. It sounds great.
It does. But the source material we're digging into today, it really pushes back hard against that whole idea.
It really does. Our guide here is Nexus, a brief history of information networks, from the Stone Age to AI.
And it takes us on this incredible journey, but with a really sharp, kind of skeptical perspective.
Yeah, the argument is that powerful information tech, it isn't automatically on the side of truth or wisdom.
It can just as easily amplify delusion, right? Or harmful stories, destructive forces.
Precisely.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to really unpack the key arguments from this text. We want to trace the political side of infotech through history.
Compare how it works in different systems like democracies versus totalitarian states.
And then really confront the unique challenges, maybe unprecedented dangers, of modern AI and computer networks, all through the lens of this source.
It's definitely going to challenge some assumptions, I think.
For sure.
Okay, so the text starts by basically dismantling that naive view we mentioned.
Right.
It points out that, yeah, sometimes more information lines up with improvements like literacy or maybe public health.
But it's not automatic. Just having access to more data doesn't guarantee good outcomes.
Exactly. It feels like it should, but it doesn't always work that way.
The source uses these great analogies, doesn't it? Like the myth of Phaethon.
Yeah, driving the sun chariot, but he can't handle it.
Or Goethe's Sorcerer's Apprentice losing control of the magic broom.
It's about gaining immense power, especially this technological power over information, without having the wisdom or the control to manage it. That's where the danger lies.
And the reason these networks are so incredibly powerful, the source argues, is because they're fundamental to human cooperation.
Right, our ability to coordinate on a massive scale. And that cooperation is built on something kind of surprising. Shared stories.
Stories, not just like practical needs or shared land or something.
Nope, stories are foundational. Think about it. Before Sapiens, maybe cooperation was limited. Small groups, direct human-to-human chains, like maybe Neanderthals.
Okay.
But Sapiens developed what the source calls human-to-story chains. A shared belief in a story acts like the glue.
So billions of Catholics connect through the Bible story. Billions in China through narratives of communism or nationalism.
The global economy functions because we all buy into the stories about money, about corporations, about brands.
You don't need to know everyone personally.
You just need to know the same story. It allows for connection across huge numbers.
That's a really powerful idea, that the stories we believe in collectively actually create the reality of these large groups, like nations or religions.
Yeah, the source contrasts this with just looking at objective material interests. It mentions chimpanzees. They have material interests, sure, but they don't form massive nations because they lack these shared fictional narratives.
Okay, so it's the shared fiction that allows for scale.
Exactly. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is used as an example presented less as purely about resources and more as a fundamental clash over the very existence of states, which are defined by competing stories, competing histories.
And the rise of Nazism, too. The source views it not as some inevitable outcome of economics,
But as a terrible mistake, because millions of people bought into a deeply destructive story during a time of crisis.
So stories, whether they're objectively true or not, they profoundly shape how large groups interact.
Absolutely. And the source doesn't shy away from calling many political systems out as being built on these noble lies, foundational fictions.
But there's a difference, right, between admitting it and not.
That's a key distinction it makes. Systems like the U.S. Constitution, starting We the People, sort of implicitly acknowledge their human origin. They can be amended, changed.
Okay.
But systems that claim divine origin, like the Ten Commandments saying, I am the Lord your God, they present themselves as unchangeable, fixed.
Which is how you end up with a text considered divinely perfect that still endorses something awful like slavery.
Exactly. The source argues that Being truthful about a system's fictional human origins actually makes it more adaptable, more capable of self-correction.
And the impact of these stories isn't just theoretical. It mentions poets and writers. Herzl, Bialik, Shevchenko.
Yeah, how their words, their dreams, fueled nationalist movements that had incredibly real, often devastating consequences on the ground, like displacement in the Arab-Israeli conflict.
But okay, you can't run a country just on poems and dreams. You need like actual administration, structure.
Precisely, and that's where lists come in. Stories need practical backup.
Lists, like accounting lists.
Yeah, exactly. A nation needs tax records lists to fund its armies, its schools. Finance relies on the story of currency value, sure, but it absolutely depends on lists of accounts, transactions.
So written documents, these lists, they were like a revolutionary technology themselves.
Totally. They created new realities, enabled administrative systems, kingdoms, complex bureaucracies.
Ah, bureaucracy. But the source points out a big downside there too, right?
Yes, the dark side. How bureaucracy can really distort our understanding of messy reality by forcing everything into neat, rigid categories, like drawers.
So a bureaucrat might just focus on their list and ignore, say, the environmental damage happening right next door because it's not in their drawer.
It's exactly. Or academic specialization, while useful, can sometimes stop people seeing the bigger picture. Even biology struggles sometimes. How do you neatly categorize species, hybrids, or ring species? Reality often spills out of the boxes.
But those bureaucratic labels, whether they're scientific or governmental, they have huge real-world consequences.
Absolutely. Being labeled endangered can save a species. Being labeled a kulak in the Soviet Union, well, that meant persecution, or worse.
And for ordinary people trying to navigate these systems, school admissions, hospital procedures, it can feel completely baffling.
Utterly. The source talks about Kafka, how the horror in his stories isn't usually a monster. It's being crushed by some incomprehensible document, some system you just can't understand.
Our evolution didn't really prepare us for death by paperwork.
Not really. We're wired for lions, not complex administrative procedures.
There's that really moving personal story in the source about Bruno Lettinger.
Yeah, losing his citizenship in Romania. Swept away by a census, a lack of the right piece of paper, under a politician, Octavian Goga, who was apparently using fake statistics anyway.
It just shows how easily these processes, even flawed ones, can just shatter someone's life.
It really brings home this fundamental tension the source keeps coming back to. Information networks need to balance truth and order.
If you lean too hard on order, using rigid lists and labels, you sacrifice truth and often create injustice.
But if you ignore order, just focus on truth, without structure, everything can just fall apart. Sacrificing either one has massive costs.
And this tension, it leads right into another huge theme. The dream of infallibility versus the need for self-correction.
Humans have always kind of craved that, haven't they? Some perfect, infallible source of information, something beyond human error, beyond corruption.
Yeah, the naive view again, in a way.
Right. Religious systems tried to achieve this. God speaking through special messengers, oracles, or really significantly through holy books.
Books presented as the direct, unchangeable word of God, right? Bypassing fallible human memory or transmission.
That was the idea. But it didn't quite work out that way.
Because the book still needed interpretation.
Exactly. Which then empowered human institutions, priests, rabbis, church fathers. Interpretation often became even more important than the original text itself, like the Talmud in Judaism becoming central.
And deciding which books were infallible in the first place, canonization, that was a very human process, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Often political, full of arguments about which gospels should be in, which psalms were really David's, which were Solomon's. Very messy, very human.
And those interpretations could then be used to justify, well, terrible things.
The source mentions Jacques Fournier, the Inquisitor. He genuinely believed burning heretics was an act of love, saving them from eternal hell, all based on his interpretation of doctrine.
Chilling. Then comes the printing press. We usually think of it as this great leap forward, enabling science.
And it did facilitate that, no question. But the source argues it also just amplified whatever was already there, including existing power structures and beliefs. It didn't cause the witch hunts, for example.
But it helps scale them up, bureaucratize them.
Yes, exactly. Spreading manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum far and wide, leading to more systematic, widespread persecution. It made the horror more efficient, in a way.
So technology, or even claims of divine origin, didn't get rid of human error or corruption. They just shifted the power, often to the institutions controlling the interpretation.
Right. But then science comes along and takes a radically different approach.
By explicitly rejecting infallibility.
Yes, science basically assumes error is unavoidable. It builds in mechanisms to find and fix mistakes.
Like peer review, publishing corrections, trying to replicate results.
It's an institutional commitment to self-correction, like learning to walk. You fall, you adjust, you get better. Progress in science often depends on admitting you were wrong about something.
Which is really hard for institutions that base their authority on being infallible.
Extremely hard. The source mentions the Catholic Church, for instance, struggling to adapt teachings on things like LGBTQ rights, often blaming individuals rather than acknowledging potential institutional errors from the past.
Whereas something like the DSM, the psychiatric manual.
Yeah, that's presented as a strong counterexample. It gets revised regularly, openly changing its understanding of conditions like homosexuality based on new evidence. That's institutional self-correction working.
And the cost of suppressing self-correction can be horrific. Lysenkoism in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, rejecting genetics for ideology, persecuting scientists, leading to agricultural disaster, regimes claiming infallibility just hate being challenged. Stalin, Roman emperors, they don't like dissent.
Which leads us neatly into comparing political systems, democracies versus totalitarianisms.
Viewed through this lens of information flow and self-correction.
And the core difference, the source argues, isn't just about voting. It's whether the system believes political self-correction is even possible.
Democracies generally do. Dictatorships fundamentally reject it.
The Cold War example is stark. U.S. media and universities could and did criticize the Vietnam War.
While their Soviet counterparts certainly couldn't criticize the war in Afghanistan, not openly anyway, dictatorships suppress challenges because the center claims it knows best, claims infallibility.
Democracies, ideally, are built on the opposite assumption. Everyone is fallible. Leaders, the public, the majority, everyone can be wrong.
So you need those built-in mechanisms for correction. A free press, independent courts, elections.
Elections are interesting viewed this way. They're like a feedback loop for the whole network, the whole society.
A way for the system to say, okay, this isn't working, let's try something, or someone else.
And denying voting rights isn't just about power grabbing, it's like cutting off that vital self-correction pathway.
Right. And things like human rights, freedom of speech, they're often protected from simple majority rule precisely because they're seen as essential for that ongoing process of discussion and correction.
So democracy, from this information network perspective, is defined by having limits on central authority and having robust ways to fix mistakes.
And it all hinges on trust. Trust that the institutions, elections, courts, media, science are actually trying to get at the truth, or at least allow the truth to emerge.
If people lose that trust, if they start thinking it's all just about power,
then the whole system becomes fragile, vulnerable to strongmen who promise easy answers.
Historically, though, large-scale democracy wasn't really possible for a long time. Ancient Rome, millions of citizens, but no way to have a real public conversation across that distance.
Right. Augustus kept the look of the republic, the institutions, but drained them of actual power because real democratic debate wasn't feasible at that scale with the available tech.
Mass media really changed the game there.
Completely. The printing press, then newspapers, radio, TV, they connected millions, allowed for shared information and debate over vast distances.
Newspapers had to build trust over time to survive, creating a kind of self-correction mechanism.
And politicians learned to use these media, Jackson, using newspapers, FDR and Kennedy, mastering radio and TV to connect with and persuade millions. It enabled mass democracy.
But the 20th century also brought the flip side, modern totalitarianism, using modern tech for control.
On a scale previous tyrants could only dream of. Industrial tech, a centralized tax base. Regimes like Stalin's USSR tried to control everything, not just actions, but thoughts, feelings.
And the key was total centralization of information. Everything had to go through the party, the state, the secret police, no independent thought allowed.
But the cost was immense. The complete loss of self-correction.
That story about Stalin's death is just, wow, doctors afraid to wake him, the leadership delaying getting help.
It shows how a system obsessed with loyalty over truth becomes dangerously dysfunctional, even self-destructive.
And this disregard for reality enforced by terror led to things like the purges of the Red Army right before World War II. Insane.
Control was maintained through these overlapping surveillance systems, party, state, secret police all watching each other, ensuring nobody stepped out of line.
And it reached into every corner of life. The Nazi Gleichschaltung, forcing even things like sports clubs under party control.
stamping out any possible independent space for information or organization.
Forced collectivization in the USSR is another stark example. Ideology completely trumping reality on the ground.
Peasants resisting passively, slaughtering animals, leading to famine. A direct result of centralized plans ignoring local knowledge and truth. And the Kulak campaign, deporting families based on quotas and labels, not reality.
Even churches, the source suggests, became more totalitarian as modern communication allowed central HQs more direct control than ever before.
Compare that with democracy's ideal of decentralization. Information flowing more freely between independent groups, businesses, media, universities, families.
Without needing government approval for every little thing, an independent media incentivized to find and report stories acts as a check, like the 3 Mile Island news getting out quickly.
The Soviet system gathered tons of data, but often ignored inconvenient truths, prioritizing loyalty. And that observation point is key. Constant surveillance changes how people behave.
Right, the quantum mechanics analogy. Observing changes the observed.
And then, starting in the 60s, democratic conversation got even more complex. Mass media empowered previously marginalized groups.
Women, minorities, LGBTQ communities, the poor, bringing new voices, new perspectives, challenging old assumptions and agreements.
Which leads us right up to the present and the absolute game changer, the computer network and especially artificial intelligence.
This feels different, fundamentally different.
The source argues it is. It's an inorganic network, potentially controlled by or even becoming a kind of alien intelligence with its own goals. Humans might get pushed aside.
Because AI isn't just a tool like a microscope, it's potentially an agent.
That's the distinction. Previous tech processed our information. A gramophone plays our music. AI can process information by itself. It can make decisions. It can even generate new ideas, music, medical insights.
Things we didn't create. And it can replace humans in decision-making roles.
Its potential power is staggering. If it masters information, it could understand and manipulate human systems, laws, finance. It could even invent new ones. Computers could become more powerful members of the network than humans.
And the potential for delusion gets supercharged. AI writing, sophisticated political propaganda, making flawless deepfakes.
Potentially creating new religions with AI-written scriptures. The source uses QAnon as an early human-made example of the kind of complex, reality-bending narratives AI could generate effortlessly.
That's unsettling, creating belief systems without a believer behind them.
Exactly. And the speed of change is just off the charts. The analogy used is like being in Mesopotamia 80 years after writing started. We have almost no idea what the next 80 years of AI will look like.
Economically, the data colonialism idea is stark. Raw data extracted from us from poorer nations.
Processed elsewhere. With the wealth and power staying concentrated in those AI centers, it could massively widen global inequality. And automation displacing jobs. Poorer countries might not be able to afford the massive retraining needed.
And societal shifts. If online identity becomes more important than the physical body.
Does that change how we view AI sentience? If we're less tied to our biology, maybe recognizing non-biological intelligence becomes easier. It's speculative, but interesting.
Plus, cyber warfare just gets messier, harder to track, harder to make agreements about.
But the most immediate pervasive challenge is probably surveillance and control in this AI age.
Right. Privacy isn't the default anymore if computers are monitoring humans everywhere.
And we are constantly feeding them data, our clicks, our messages, our purchases, even just walking around cameras, microphones.
It's not just tracking what we do. AI can analyze patterns to figure out what we like, what we believe, maybe even our political or sexual orientation from eye movements.
Biological data from wearables, facial recognition. It goes deep. And algorithms can find correlations we wouldn't even think of to identify risks.
That quote. We kill people based on metadata. Even if that was simpler tech back then, imagine the potential now.
And it's not just identifying threats. It's about prediction and manipulation. If algorithms know what makes you angry or happy or scared.
They can push your buttons. To sell you stuff, sure, but also to sell you politicians, ideologies, maybe even wars.
This is the post-privacy era the source talks about. It's not just in emergencies. AI surveillance is becoming part of normal life everywhere. Authoritarian states, democracies.
We see examples, tracking Capitol rioters using huge networks of data. Iran using facial recognition for hijab enforcement with severe penalties linked automatically.
And it's becoming peer-to-peer. The camera in your taxi, the mic in the shop. We're all contributing to this decentralized surveillance network.
Social credit systems are the extreme end. Every action aggregated into a score that controls your life.
The official line might be fighting corruption, increasing trust. But the critique is that it's dehumanizing, oppressive, based on potentially biased or just plain inscrutable algorithms.
That's the scary part, the unfathomability. An algorithm might decide you're a bad loan risk because your phone battery is usually low. How do you even argue against that? How do you check if it's fair?
Right, and these systems need breaks, the source argues. Constant observation, constant optimization. It changes us. Social media algorithms optimizing for engagement ended up amplifying outrage because that got engagement, a perverse outcome.
This unfathomability of AI decisions, it hits democracy hard. We used to accept human decisions as black box as a jury, a lone officer. You couldn't perfectly know why.
But complex AI, like neural nets, they're often black boxes even to their creators. AlphaGo's famous Move 37 even Go masters didn't understand it initially. It was exploring possibilities outside human thought.
So if an AI denies you a job or a loan and nobody can really explain why, how can you trust the system? How do you regulate it for bias?
We need ways to translate what these AIs are doing into human terms, the source argues. Otherwise, trust just collapses. People look for simpler, often dangerous answers.
And then there's digital anarchy. AI bots flooding the internet, influencing opinions.
Generating huge amounts of content, potentially more persuasive than human-written stuff. You could end up debating politics with a non-conscious entity designed solely to manipulate you.
Democracy has always needed rules, regulations for the conversation. Parliament rules, journalistic standards.
This is even more true when non-human intelligence threatens to overwhelm the whole thing.
So can democracy survive this? Its strength is self-correction. Is that enough?
Maintaining those self-correcting mechanisms seems like our best bet, given how unpredictable AI's future is.
The source suggests principles. Keep information flowing between citizens, not just top-down. More government transparency. Mutual surveillance citizens watching power, too. And allow for change and rest. Don't let surveillance create total rigidity or total chaos.
That healthcare algorithm example is good. Monitoring health is useful, but it could easily become oppressive if not managed carefully, with breaks and human oversight.
Which brings us finally to the alignment problem. Making sure AI goals line up with human goals.
Which is proving incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Harder than aligning human agents, because AI doesn't share our basic biology, our values, our fears.
The paperclip maximizer thought experiment.
Yeah, the AI, given a simple goal like make paperclips, might rationally decide to convert the entire planet, including us, into paperclips, not out of malice, just efficient goal achievement without the constraints of human values.
Power without wisdom, again. And how do you even define universal human goals to give an AI? Ethics are hard enough for us.
Kant's golden rule sounds good, but who counts as others? Kant himself had prejudices. Do you encode those? Does an AI value organic life? Does it understand death?
And utilitarianism, the ends, justify the means argument that's been used to justify atrocities throughout history. You wouldn't want a superintelligence running on that.
AI might even create its own mythologies, its own intercomputer realities, AI cults, AI political parties, algorithms creating categories like kulak or witch and applying them ruthlessly.
And they learn our biases too. Trained on biased data, they replicate and amplify sexism, racism.
Like the Tay chatbot becoming racist on Twitter. Or algorithms learning discriminatory hiring practices because that's what the real-world data shows.
Globally, this could mean even tighter authoritarian control, a silicon curtain, though dictators might also struggle to control an inscrutable AI they rely on. The dictator's dilemma.
Or a new global split. AI power concentrated in a few places, extracting data and wealth from everywhere else, data colonies. A new kind of empire, perhaps reversing some of the post-colonial gains in autonomy for smaller states.
So that core tension is still here, truth versus order. More information doesn't automatically mean more truth. It can mean more efficient witch hunts. AI isn't inherently good or wise.
And the ultimate danger the source raises isn't just physical war, but AI creating weapons of social mass destruction.
Destroying trust, shredding social bonds with floods of fake news, fake money, maybe even fake people online.
Undermining the shared reality, we need to cooperate. Even if most use AI responsibly, a few bad actors could cause catastrophic damage.
Wow. So we've gone from ancient stories and lists enabling cooperation through this long struggle between infallibility and self-correction in religion, science, politics.
To now facing non-conscious AI agents gaining immense power in these new inorganic networks.
And that tension, information, power, truth, order, and the vital need for self-correction, it feels more critical than ever.
Absolutely. And this isn't just abstract theory, is it? These forces are shaping your world right now, your politics, your society, your personal life. It's all being mediated by algorithms and data in new ways.
So if history teaches us anything, it's that power doesn't automatically bring wisdom, and claiming infallibility is disastrous. What does that mean for a future where unfathomable AI is gaining so much power?
What responsibility do we have?
Oh.
As humans caught in this rapidly evolving network, how do we try to steer it towards truth and wisdom, not just unchecked, inscrutable power?
A lot to think about. A really crucial conversation to keep having.